a recent polling on my community feed indicated that more people than not are dissatisfied with their existence in this dimension, which was kind of comical watching the votes come in. In fact, it went from yes, 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 very satisfied to the no's winning. It went back and forth, which is probably just indicative of the variety of subscribers that I have tuned into this channel and the complexity of problems and suffering that we all endure is multifaceted and difficult to understand for anybody, even the most trained psychologists. So what am I saying? I'm not here to tell you how to live your life or when and where to practice what techniques to alleviate suffering. Rather, I'm just going to read from a book called Altered Traits. In 2017, this book came out. Science reveals how meditation changes your mind, brain, and body. I'm going to read several paragraphs from several chapters. Thankfully, this book has a great way of summing up all the information as each chapter goes through the methodology they used and discovery process to get the results they came to, as well as a little bit of the history of it. But again, at the end of each chapter, they have a section that they recommend in a nutshell, which sums it all up. So that's what I'm going to bring to you guys today. It was published and written, co-authored by Dr. Daniel Goleman, psychologist who many years reported on brain and behavioral sciences for New York Times. And then Dr. Richard Davidson is a Vilas Research Professor of Psychology and Psychiatry at the Brain Lab, founded at Center of Healthy Minds, University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's published more than 320 articles and edited 14 books. Since the publication of this piece of literature, there's also been many more studies that have come out indicating the benefits of meditation and mindfulness, stress-reducing techniques. So again, I'm not telling you how and when to meditate. All I'm doing is offering some tools that you can use at your own will. Again, it does a great job of just laying it all out and letting you decide what's useful. So get cozy and let me just read a few paragraphs for you, okay? Again, Altered Traits by Daniel Goleman and Richard J. Davidson. The paragraphs I'm going to be reading from are the first chapter, and then I'm going to skip ahead to chapter 5, 6, 7, 8, and a few paragraphs after that, just anecdotally so you get some understanding. As for me, though, I'll back up. I discovered mindfulness-based meditation when I was 26, and I'm 34 now, and I have been practicing on and off for years, and I can distinctively say that I have reaped benefits from that. My attention span, capacity for loving kindness, empathy, judgment, stress reduction, I would feel is somewhat noticeably higher than not only the individuals around me in my immediate vicinity, but even further out to our society as a whole. No, this isn't a pill to fix all your problems, but it's a tool. Again, like I said, I discovered it when I was 26 or so. I was having sleep difficulties, suffering from back pain. I saw a sleep doctor who I really respect, and he couldn't find anything wrong with me, but he did recommend from a seminar that he went to, this was in Bellingham, Washington, about mindfulness-based meditation techniques, recommend it to me. I started it. I wouldn't say it completely alleviated my sleep disturbance and back pain, but it helped tamper down my pain threshold. And as indicated by the scientific literature, that seems to be what it does. So let's go ahead and get into it. As a most primary example from chapter 1, the deep path and the wide, from the top. One bright fall morning, Steve Z, a lieutenant colonel working in the Pentagon, heard a crazy loud noise and was instantly covered in debris as ceiling caved in, knocking him to the floor unconscious. It was September 11th, 2001. A passenger jet had smashed into the huge building very near Steve's office. The debris that buried Steve saved his life as the plane's fuselage exploded, a fireball of massive flames scouring the open office. Despite a concussion, Steve returned to work 4 days later, laboring through feverish nights from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. because they were daytime hours in Afghanistan. Soon after, he volunteered for a year in Iraq. I mainly went to Iraq because I couldn't walk around the mall without being hyper-vigilant. Wary of how people looked at me, totally on guard, Steve recalls. I couldn't get on an elevator. I felt trapped in my car in traffic. His symptoms were classic post-traumatic stress disorder. Then came the day he realized he couldn't handle this on his own. Steve ended up with a psychotherapist he still sees. She led him very gently to try mindfulness. Mindfulness, he recalls, gave me something I could do to help feel more calm, less stressed, not be so reactive. As he practiced more, added loving kindness to the mix, and went on retreats, his PTSD symptoms gradually became less frequent, less intense. Although his irritability and restlessness still came, he couldn't see them coming. Tales like Steve offer encouraging news about meditation. We have been meditators all of our adult lives, and like Steve, for ourselves, and the practice has countless benefits. Again, guys, this is written by Dr. Daniel Goleman and Richard J. Davidson. So there is a pretty clear example of the benefits regarding post-traumatic stress disorder, which I also experience, and yeah, I would say it's helped that too. So skipping on to chapter 5, after their research, in a nutshell, the amygdala, a key node in the brain's stress circuitry, shows dampened activity from a mere 30 or so hours of mindfulness-based stress reduction practice. Other mindfulness training shows a similar benefit, and there are hints in the research that these changes are trait-like. They appear not simply during the explicit instruction to perceive the stressful stimuli mindfully, but even in the baseline state, with reductions in amygdala activation as great as 50%. Such lessening of the brain's stress reaction appears in response not simply to seeing gory pictures used in laboratory, but also to more real-life challenges like the stressful trier interview before a live audience. More daily practice seems associated with less stress reactivity. Experienced Zen practitioners can withstand higher levels of pain and have less reaction to this stressor. A 3-month meditation retreat brought indicators of better emotional regulation, and long-term practice was associated with greater functional connectivity between the prefrontal areas that manage emotion and the areas of the amygdala that react to stress, resulting in less reactivity. And an improved ability to regulate attention accompanies some of the beneficial impact of meditation on stress reactivity. Finally, the quickness with which long-term meditation recovers from stress underlines how trait effects emerge with continued practice. From the next chapter, Primed for Love, the section titled Empathy Means Feeling With. Brain research tells us there's 3 kinds of empathy. Cognitive empathy lets us understand how other person thinks, we see their perspective. And emotional empathy, we feel what the other person is feeling. And the third, empathetic concern or caring, lies at the heart of compassion. The word empathy refers to the English language only in the early years of the 20th century as a translated German word of Gefühl, which might be translated as feeling with. Purely cognitive ability has no such sympathetic feelings, while the defining sign of emotional empathy is feeling in your own body what the suffering person seems to feel. But if what we feel upsets us, all too often our next response means we tune out, which helps us better block out compassionate action. In the lab, one way this withdrawal instinct shows up is in people averting their gaze from photos that depict intense suffering, like a man so painfully burned that his skin has peeled away. Similarly, homeless people complain that they become invisible. Those passing by on the street ignore them, another form of averting the gaze from suffering. Since compassion begins with accepting what's happening without turning away, an essential first step toward taking helpful action, can meditation that cultivate compassion tip the balance? Researchers at Germany's Max Planck Institute in Leipzig taught volunteers a version of loving-kindness meditation. The volunteers practiced generating such loving-kindness in a 6-hour instructional session and at home on their own. Before they had learned this loving-kindness method, when the volunteers saw graphic videos of people suffering, only their negative circuits for emotional empathy activated. Their brains reflected the state of a victim's suffering as though it were happening to themselves. This left them feeling upset, an emotional echo of distress that transferred from the victims to themselves. Then people were instructed to empathize with the videos to share the emotions of people they were seeing. Such empathy, fMRI studies revealed, activated circuits centering on parts of the insula, circuits that light up when we ourselves are suffering. Empathy means that people felt the pain of those who were suffering. But when another group instead got instructions in compassion, feeling love for those suffering, their brains activated a completely different set of circuits. Those for parental love of a child, their brain signature was clearly different from those who received instructions in empathy. And this is only after 8 hours. Such a positive regard for victim of suffering means we confront and deal with their difficulty. This allows us to move along that spectrum from noticing what's going on to the payoff, actually helping them. In many East Asian countries, the name Kuan Yin, the reverse symbol of compassionate awakening, translates as the one who listens and hears the cries of the world in order to come and help. Boy, do we need that in Western culture. Moving along. In a nutshell, simply learning about compassion does not necessarily increase compassionate behavior. In the arc form of empathizing with someone suffering to actually reaching out to help, loving kindness, compassion, meditation ups the odds of helping. There are 3 forms of empathy: cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, and the empathetic concern. Often people empathize emotionally with someone suffering, but then tune out to soothe their own uncomfortable feelings. But compassion meditation enhances empathetic concern, activates circuits for good feeling and love, as well as circuits that register the suffering of others and prepares the person to act with suffering is encountered. Compassion and loving kindness increases amygdala activation to suffering, while focused attention on something neutral like breath lessens amygdala activity. Loving kindness acts quickly. In as little as 8 hours of practice, reductions in usually intractable unconscious bias emerge after just 16 hours. And the longer people practice, the stronger those brains and behavioral tendencies toward compassion become. The strength of these effects from the early days of meditation may signal our biological preparedness for goodness. Very interesting. Next chapter, titled Attention. This is focused on the cognitive control and mental bandwidth we have to process the world around us. Cognitive control in itself, on the other hand, lets us focus on the specific goal or task and keep it in mind while resisting distractions. The very ability multitasking harms. Such steely focus is an essential in jobs like air traffic control, where screens can be filled from distractions from the controller's main focus, a given incoming plane, or just getting in through your daily to-do list. The good news for multitaskers, cognitive control can be strengthened. Undergrads volunteer to try 10-minute sessions of either focusing on counting their breath or an app comparison task, browsing Huffington Post, Snapchat, or BuzzFeed. Just 3 10-minute sessions of breath counting was enough to appreciably increase their attention skills on a battery of tests, and the biggest gain were among the heavy multitaskers who did more poorly on those tests initially. If multitasking results in flabby attention, a concentration workout like countless breaths offers a way to tone up, at least in the short term, but there was no indication that an upward bump in attention would last. The improvement came immediately after the workout, and so registers of meditation. And so registers on our radar as a state effect, not a lasting trait. The brain's attention circuitry needs more sustained efforts to create a sustainable trait, as we will see. Still, even beginners in meditation can sharpen their attention skills with some surprising benefits. For instance, researchers at the University of California, Santa Barbara gave volunteers an 8-minute instruction on mindfulness of the breath and found that this short focusing session, compared to reading newspapers or just relaxing, lessened how much their mind wandered afterward. While that finding is of interest, the follow-up was even more compelling. The same researchers gave volunteers a 2-week course in mindfulness of breathing as well as daily activities like eating for a total of 6 hours plus 10-minute booster sessions at home daily. The active control group studied nutrition for the same amount of time. Again, Mindfulness improved concentration and lessened mind wandering. A surprise, mindfulness can also improve working memory. The holding in mind of informations that it can transfer into long-term memory. Attention is crucial for working memory. If we aren't paying attention, those digits won't register in the first place. Moving on, in a nutshell, meditation at its root retains attention, and different types boost varying types of attention. Mindfulness-based stress reduction strengthens selective attention, while long-term vipassana practice enhances this even more. Even 5 months after the 3-month shamatha retreat, meditators had enhanced vigilance, the ability to sustain their attention, and the attention blink lessened greatly after 3 months on a vipassana retreat. But the beginnings of this lessening also showed up just after 17 minutes of mindfulness in beginners. No doubt a transitionary state for newcomers and a more lasting trait for those retreatants. That same practice becomes perfect maxim likely applies to several other quickie meditations. Just 10 minutes of mindfulness overcame the damage to concentration from multitasking, at least in the short term. Only 8 minutes of mindfulness lessened mind wandering for a while. About 10 hours of mindfulness over a 2-week period strengthened attention and working memory and led to substantial improved scores on the graduate school entrance exam. While meditation boosts many aspects of attention, these are short-term gains. More lasting benefit, no doubt, requires ongoing practice. From the next chapter, lightness of being. The brain's default mode activates when we're doing nothing that demands mental effort. Just letting our mind wander, we hash over the thoughts and feelings, often unpleasant, that focus on ourselves, constructing the narrative we experience as our self. The default mode circuits quiet during mindfulness and loving kindness in meditation. In early stages of meditation, disquieting the self system entails brain circuits that inhibit the default zones. In later practice, the connections and activity within those areas wane. This quieting of self-circuitry begins as a state effect seen during or immediately after meditation, but with long-term practitioners it becomes an enduring trait, along with lessened activity in the default mode itself. The resulting decrease in stickiness means that self-focused thoughts and feelings that arise in the mind have much less grab and decreasing ability to hijack attention. From the next chapter, mind, body, and genome. None of the many forms of meditation studied here was originally designed to treat illness, at least as we recognize it in the West, yet today the scientific literature is replete with studies assessing whether these ancient practices might be useful for treating such illnesses. MBSR and similar methods can reduce the emotional component of suffering from those diseases, but not cure the maladies. Yet mindfulness training, even as short as 3 days, produces a short-term decrease in pro-inflammatory cytokines, a molecule responsible for inflammation. And the more you practice, the lower levels become of these pro-inflammatory cytokines. This seems to become a trait effect with extensive practice, with imaging finding in meditators that at rest lower levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines, along with an increased connectivity between regulatory circuitry and the sectors of the brain self system, particularly the posterior cingulate cortex. Among experienced meditation practitioners, a day-long period of intensive mindfulness practice downregulates genes involved in inflammation. The enzyme telomerase, which slows cellular aging, increases after 3 months of intensive practice of mindfulness and loving kindness. Finally, long-term meditation may lead to beneficial structural changes in the brain, though current evidence is inconclusive as to whether effects emerge with relatively short practice like MBSR, or only become apparent with longer-term practice. All in all, the hints of neural rewiring that undergird altered traits seems scientifically credible, though we await further studies for specifics. Next chapter, meditation as psychotherapy. In a nutshell, although meditation was not originally intended to treat psychological problems, in modern times it has shown more promise in the treatment and some, particularly depression and anxiety disorders. In a meta-analysis of 47 studies on the application of meditation methods treat patients with mental health problems, the findings show that meditation can lead to a decrease in depression, particularly severe depression, anxiety, and pain, as about as much medications, but with no side effects. That's something to note there, guys. Meditation also can, to a lesser degree, reduce the toll of psychological distress. Loving kindness meditation may be particularly helpful for patients suffering with trauma, especially those with PTSD. The melding of mindfulness with cognitive therapy, or MBCT, has become most empirically well-validated psychological treatment with the meditation basis. The integration continues to have a wide impact in the clinical world, with empirical tests of applications to even larger range of psychological disorders underway. While there are occasional reports of negative effects on meditation, the findings to date underscore the potential promise of meditation-based strategies. An enormous increase in scientific research bodes well for the future. I'll skip to the next chapter, Hidden Treasure. In a nutshell, the massive levels of gamma activity in the yogis and the synchrony of gamma oscillations across widespread regions of the brain suggested that the vastness and panoramic quality of awareness that they report. The yogis' awareness in the present moment, without getting stuck in the anticipation of the future or rumination on the past, seems reflected in a strong inverted V response to the pain, where yogis show little anticipatory response and very rapid recovery. The yogis also showed neural evidence of effortless concentration. It only takes a flicker of neural activity to place their attention on a chosen object and little or no effort to hold it there. Finally, when generating compassion, the brain's yogi become more connected to their bodies, particularly their hearts, and indicating emotional resilience. The different types of meditation practices. The vast majority of meditators in the West fall into the first level. People who meditate for only a short period, a few minutes to half an hour or so on most days. A smaller group continues on this on a long-term meditator level, and a mere handful attain the expertise of the yogis. Let's look at the impact of those who have just begun meditation practice. When it comes to stress recovery, the evidence for some benefits in the first few months of daily practice are more subjective than objective and shaky. On the other hand, amygdala, a key node in the brain's stress circuitry, shows lessened reactivity after 30 or so hours over 8 weeks of MBSR practice. Compassion meditation shows stronger benefits from the get-go. As few as 7 total hours over the course of 2 weeks leads to increased connectivity in circuits important for empathy and positive feelings, strong enough to show up outside the meditation state per se. This is the first sign of a state morphing into a trait. Though these effects likely will not last without daily practice, the fact that they appear outside the formal meditation state itself may reflect our innate wiring for basic goodness. Beginners also find improvements in attention very early on, including less mind wandering after just 8 minutes of mindfulness practice. But even as little as 2 weeks of practice is sufficient to produce less mind wandering and better focus on working memory, enough for a significant boost in scores on the GRE, the entrance exam for graduate school. Indeed, these findings suggest decrease in activation in the self-relevant regions of the default mode with as little as 2 months of practice. When it comes to physical health, there's more good news. Small improvements in the molecular markers of cellular aging seem to emerge with just 30 hours of practice. Still, all such efforts are unlikely to persist without unsustained practice. I wanted to read from one of the last chapters. In a nutshell, from the beginning hours, days, and weeks of meditation, several benefits emerge. For one, beginners' brains show less amygdala reactivity to stress. Improvements in attention after just 2 weeks of practice included better focus, less mind wandering, and improved working memory, with concrete payoff and boosted scores on graduate school exams. Some of the earliest benefits are with compassionate meditation, including increased connectivity in the circuitry for empathy, and markers for inflammation lessen a bit with just 30 hours of practice. While these benefits emerge even with remarkably modest hours of practice, they are likely fragile and need daily sessions to be sustained. For long-term meditators, those who have done about 1,000 hours or so of practice, the benefits documented are far more than robust, with some new ones added to the mix. There are brain and hormonal indicators of lower reactivity to stress and lessened inflammation, a strengthening of the prefrontal cortex managing stress, distress, and lower levels of stress hormone cortisol, signaling less reactivity to stresses in general. Compassion meditation at this level brings a greater neural attunement with those who are suffering and enhanced likelihood of doing something to help. When it comes to attention, there are a range of benefits. Stronger selective attention, decreased attentional blink, greater ease in sustaining attention, and heightened readiness to respond to whatever may come, and less mind wandering. Along with fewer self-obsessed thoughts comes a weakening of the circuitry for attachment. Other biological and brain changes include slower breath rate, indicating a slowing of the metabolic rate. A day-long retreat enhances the immune system. Signs of meditative stress continue during sleep. And signs of meditative states continue during sleep. All these changes suggest the convergence of altered traits. Finally, there are yogis at an Olympic level who have an average of 27,000 lifetime hours of meditation. They show clear signs of altered traits such as large gamma waves and synchrony among far-flung brain regions, a brain pattern not seen before in anyone, and also occurs at rest among those yogis who have done the most hours of practice. While strongest during the practice of open presence and of compassion, the gamma continues while the mind is at rest to a lesser degree. Also, yogis' brains seem to age more slowly compared to other people their age. Other signs of yogis' expertise include stopping and starting meditative states in seconds and effortlessness in meditation. Their pain reaction too sets yogis apart. Little or no anticipatory anxiety, a short but intense reaction during the pain itself, and then rapid recovery. During compassion meditation, yogis' brains and hearts couple in ways also not seen in other people. Most significant, the yogi's brain states at rest resemble the brain states of others while they meditate. The state has become a trait. There's actually another paragraph indicating in here the cognitive health of some of these experienced meditators resemble that of people decades younger than them with enough practice. So I hope you enjoyed this, guys and gals. I'm not a doctor. I'm not prescribing meditation to you as a pill to solve all your problems. What I just wanted to do was list out some of the benefits of continuing daily practice as little as 10-15 minutes a day. I can say honestly, over the past even 2 weeks or 3 of doing this, that I have much greater focus and emotional control. So something to note there. Hope you guys have a blessed week. I'll talk to you soon. See ya.